just seeing that there's nothing strange on the screen. Nope.
Well, I mean,
Well, well, yeah. I mean, how would you call that? Well,
actually, it reminds me a bit of some kind of like procedurally generated landscape or whatnot.
yeah, like just some kind of not a real landscape
Not at
kind
all.
of a thing. Yeah.
But it's a good attempt. I see the pattern at least.
Yeah.
Like, those can be the colonies where you play them and see them evolving.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. We're recording, right?
Yes.
Great. So good. So yeah, welcome to Arado, another episode of Arado podcast. This time in English, and I'm interviewing Kirill from the team. We have come here to invade ICT City premises to have this, and we're surrounded by this rather trippy art, you could say. But yeah, how's it going?
How good? I like the procedural generation, definitely. So it's just perfect.
Exactly. Nice. But yeah, we are about to go through a bit on your background, how you ended up becoming a software developer, and how did you come to Finland, come to Arado, and then on your work these days with the programming language Rust, and with the company Showseeker. That was correct, right?
Yep.
Good. But yeah, so if we go all the way back to the beginning, how did this all start? Did you already, sort of as a child, did you have a interest towards like technological stuff or like computers? And what are your sort of first memories about those?
Well, not sure if those are first memories, but yeah, I definitely was interested in technological stuff, but more in entertainment part of that.
Uh-huh.
So I used to be dreaming about, well, in Russia they had been a bit different compared to the general market. And when there used to be those Super Nintendo, those SNES all over the world, they hadn't been really that thing in Russia, but there were lots of cheap clones of that. And, nobody even knew what a piracy is by those days, so we thought that it's a great thing.
Yeah.
So it's a regional, and everybody wanted that. And ironically, sometimes when like some other people brought their original one, they didn't even couldn't advertise that because nobody cared. Why would you do that? I mean, there is a better one. So alternatively, all these non-original things, they came in various shapes, and one of those happened to be a keyboard, just a big keyboard with a slot for cartridges. So you can use that as a playing machine. First of all, insert the cartridges and just play, because into that keyboard you could also plug in the controllers. And you could play like a regular, I don't know, Contra, whatever other games back in those days were popular. So, and that was my thing. I wanted that first of all. So I was keeping asking my parents, like, go and buy me something, please. And
do you remember what was the name of that machine?
Oh yeah, that's Subor. If that helps.
Okay.
So that was totally weird thing. They came in like abundance of modifications. There were like some of them shaped like a racing car, some of them shaped something else. But parents apparently hoping that I'm doing some normal things eventually bought me that keyboard as like educational purposes. Well, obviously I couldn't care much. To my displease, the only cartridge I've got was something education. I didn't like that, so I started to go all of my friends who had the other things and take those and played. So that continued for a while. I liked the tech itself. I knew lots about the cores, how you plug them in TV. I was relatively small, like I didn't even go to school by those days. So it kind of was still new for me and very exciting. So I learned a lot about that thing, but eventually it became pretty boring because, well, I've played all the games around me. Some of them I could beat, some of them I couldn't, but anyway, those were very familiar games. It came through years. Obviously, I was going to school after that. So it turned out that there are now more better things you could play with. I think PlayStation was already on the market. And so that thing went somewhere to collect dust. But after a while, I just got so bored that I remember about that and decided to check out what's wrong with that first cartridge I've got. And it turned out that it was a cartridge for the keyboard. Like you could really educate yourselves, and there were various things. Some of them were like child development things like
Yeah.
Color, something.
Mm.
So boring.
Yeah.
But then there were some weird things like, for instance, learn to type fast. That was something unusual
Yeah.
because I was in the beginning of the school. I've just learned how to write. Well, so somewhere, well, a bit after those, but anyway.
Yeah.
So I could read something. It was in Russian. That was great. I could write, but slowly. So I wanted to learn how to write fast.
Yeah.
And my mother's work, there was a typing machine. So I wanted to write a novel or I don't know something.
Yeah.
And that was an educational tool for pretty much the same keyboard, the same layout at least.
Yeah.
That taught how to type fast. Isn't that a great thing? So
Yeah.
I started learning that and never finished actually. So I don't know how to type with like 10 properly, 10 fingers, blind way, no idea.
Yeah.
I got into the educational thing in the end. So I realized that cartridge is somehow useful and it's not that boring after all.
Yeah.
So I decided to try some other things, and there were like things with instructions. For instance, I ended up with basically getting a book on somewhere on the market that contained things for one of these softwares inside. And one of those was actually a BASIC interpreter. BASIC is a very basic software development language.
Basic interpreter.
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
Designed to actually educate people mainly. That's how it was used by the age I was touching it. And I've got the book who actually had a list of as it was advertising again, something like educational games, like yada yada.
Yeah.
Just listings of programs explained word by word what they are doing. That were doing something. For instance, a guessing game, like you guess a number and the computer replies when you are trying to attempt to guess that, whether it's a bigger or smaller. So like very basic games that you can code yourself.
So it actually sort of taught you how sort of the logic behind the code and then the code itself.
Well, obviously I was a bad student. I didn't care about teaching that logic itself. I was interested about the games or more about the idea of being able to create a game.
Yeah.
And all these guessing games were boring, to be honest. I mean, they were good in the beginning, but the end, like the pivot of all this education was the last section of the book explaining how to build a snake game. So that was exciting. The listing was pretty long compared to the other ones.
Yeah.
And by the end, I think I learned with this how to type fast hints. I learned how to actually. I learned how to type it fast too.
Yeah.
So at some point, my days after school started with me coming back and just typing the same routinely remembered thing and play a snake game.
So you needed to. So you couldn't save that.
No.
You needed to. So you needed to type it again every time when you wanted to.
It's Super Nintendo. I mean, it had on the RAM like the memory that you've had on a chip.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that was like a Groundhog Day. Every day you close, like I mean, even if the electricity bumps,
yeah.
you have to restart.
And you needed to build the game every time.
Yes.
Basically again. That's wild.
And ironically, I was spending way too many time, I think, on typing into the same thing without altering that. I don't know why I really enjoyed that. But after a while, I actually realized that, well, that logic that had been explained in that book, I can learn that too, so why not?
Yeah.
And I ended up doing that by the time we actually got the IT classes in our school, like the ones that were trying to teach us basic, and everything was pretty much familiar. So it ended up real smooth. And even our teacher somehow considered that I'm pretty talented, even though it was just some, I don't know, hell of a lot of snake game in my head.
Yeah, but I mean, so, well, definitely when you write it again and again every day, like you must have at least like almost remembered it by heart at some point.
It didn't surprise me, at least.
Yeah.
Which still retrospectively surprises me why I didn't even try to alter that in the beginning. But, well, when the IT classes came, I actually realized that, there is logic and we can continue and change that. I eventually created something like snake that could pass the walls and whatever.
Yeah.
And there came the drive. Before that, it was more like learning process where you just grasp for techniques. You just learn something, you touch it, but it doesn't. You don't create.
Yeah.
And here I just realized that I can do a lot, just a lot, and it's not as boring as guess the number game. And
Yeah.
so even the snake game was. So that continued for a while, but again, after at some point it just declined. I touched a few things like HTML, so I could, for instance, create UIs, but that was again something at the beginning of that, so we didn't have that JavaScript thingy even explained for us.
Yeah. I just want to get the time frame right. Sort of when about is this?
Yeah, so I guess that is somewhere close to the middle of the school, maybe. When I've started to advance into that and start to not only type the snake game, but alter that and somehow do with that.
So was that in the 90s then, or?
Right, that time frame. So let me remember. I need to remember when I've ended my school. Yeah, I think it was actually in somewhere in zeros. So
okay,
2000 maybe is the right place.
Okay, 2000s, around there.
Like that, yeah. So then after that, I've started to actually play with like other technologies, but again, nothing too deep. Somehow I was pretty much operationally limited to basic. I didn't think of software development still as something I would love to do the whole life. It was enjoyable, it was great, but there are so many other things I would like to try and learn myself. So, it was somewhere there up until the university after that, I guess.
Yeah.
So I learned a few things by that, but nothing special. But there in university, there were lots of people, lots of different people, different knowledge. And at first steps was actually, these were the days where we started to get an access to a wide-bandwidth internet.
Yeah, so and this was went to the university in Russia?
Yeah, in St. Petersburg, the St. Petersburg State University.
Gotcha.
And yeah, there were two ways you could go there. One, go in St. Petersburg, and there are premises for that. There is one set of teachers that teach you there.
Yeah.
And another one is for people who come from all Russia that's not St. Petersburg. They call it like not foreign, but like external trail, something like that. There's a different set of teacher, and they live in Peterhof, which is also technically St. Petersburg, but it's like 1.5 hours travel time by car between. So it's a pretty distant one. It's like on the edge of St. Petersburg. And some people don't even know that that's St. Petersburg because it's so far, so distant, and there are some cities in between.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty unusual state. Well, anyway, it's a place where there's pretty good nature around. Something compared to Turku, I guess. Well, in a sense, of course. And there had been lots of residents of like Tsars and other people, like main people around. There's that huge fountain place, for instance, everybody keeps talking about. So there in the nature, there is 6 main ones and a few adjacent ones, dormitories, relatively isolated from the whole city, with this different set of premises and set of teachers to teach you. So I decided to went there just because there were rumors that they teach better there. Plus that feeling that everything is kind of on its way. Like it's a real dorm compared to the St. Petersburg one. So there's like a campus there. That was the idea. And in that campus there are lots of people and again lots of different things. And there, for instance, I've seen the different operating systems for first time. So that Subor thing had contained something that might be called an operating system, but I didn't know back in the days that there is one. And all I knew was Windows. Despite that, I didn't touch any programming much during the school. I touched a bit, but anyway, not much in school games. I have been playing the games like a maniac throughout my school time, so I knew a PC, how to handle that. And just sometimes played and try to alter some resources of the game so far and just find something, but didn't manage to get anything like really great there. But anyway, I knew something around Windows and how to do stuff, and there comes a guy who slaps his laptop and there's something I don't even know what's that. Hey, there's Linux, you want to check it out. And the broadband internet that had brought that stream of knowledge, it was still pretty limited in the sense that you have to price per megabyte to download. But at least you could download a megabyte in minutes, not in like a couple of hours. So that was a breakthrough that changed everything. So I started reading websites around that Linux too. Of course, lots of junk I also read and done. But somehow through all these years, university years, I've been getting carried over there more and more, trying to automate it somehow, trying to fix things, make them work the way I wanted.
Yeah.
Hence came the knowledge of some internal tools, Bash, Python, etc. So again, somewhere close into development.
Yeah.
And then during the university courses, there are also, well, even though the whole education was focused on mathematics, and that what I was thinking would be my work somehow related to that. The software development was also in the program, just because well, that was the whole general idea of the university department I went in, and they decided to teach us something. So we knew something, and eventually Java came onto the horizon, and I somehow got familiarized with that.
Yeah, was there already sort of knowledge at that time that sort of that software development is going to be a big thing, that if you learn this skill, you will have a lot of work to do in the coming sort of decades?
I think yes. I didn't know that myself that clear, I would say. Definitely not. I wouldn't even imagine that. But however, I've got a few friends of mine, not friends, okay. Few people I knew, somehow good. And they were of different age, some were at my father's age. But anyway, they were software developers and they were doing something. And everybody was, usually from my circles, at least my parents were talking about that guy, for instance, like, oh, he's a software developer, he does something like with the computers. You can do that too, stop wasting time on that. So anyhow, there was an idea that these guys are occupied, they're doing something like they're doing business, and so you can do something with that.
Yeah.
And somewhere back in the university when I was trying to fix up things on my laptop, Linux, and nothing worked, I would think that, anyway, that's also a path to do things like, I mean, it's simpler to do with the computers and internet, to deal with the computers and internet for me, compared to, for instance, dealing with people and trying to sell them something, as my parents were doing. And, comparing these two alternatives, I would say I was leaning towards the computer. Yet again, nothing about software development. Back in the days, I would think that maybe actually administrating for starters would be better, because I could learn things from external better, and then I could dive in and somehow improve the situation with my automated tools as a software development. So that was somehow naive, but a plan that didn't happen. I'm not sure, luckily or not. But anyway, it just struck me somewhere in the end of the university that, I'm a mathematician, sure, I'm doing something, but nobody's paying me for that. And there comes my PhD, which I most probably will be taking, just because why not? Yeah. And I wouldn't be getting any money to live on a PhD. So what do I do? I could ask my parents, but that's a bit weird. Yeah. Or I could go for work, and then just somehow I decided, maybe why not software development? Because I went on the market and just compared the companies' vacancies, companies' positions, like what could they offer in money-wise and career-wise, etc. And turned out to be, if you want to sit at the computer in front of it, you must probably better be a software developer to do something. And then I remembered all these creativeness bases I've got before, and I was thinking, maybe I can even improve that and go to game dev and go with that Turbo Snake somewhere. So somewhat again driven by that, I don't know, pleasure and games rather than something, yet somewhere creativeness back in that head. Yeah.
So you were trying to sort of search, did you try to search something directly from like game development? Or?
Oh, no, I didn't even consider that, because usually, especially back in those days, I would think that, and maybe that back in the days was true, because that was like 2006, 2007, somewhere around there. I thought that whenever you go into game dev, you have to be really, really like smart, because back in those days there weren't even really open source engines you could use. Usually if you are building a game, you're starting with an engine and then somehow using that engine through pain and misery to build the whole game, to design the whole game. Yeah. And you had to know a lot to make that engine work, and then to adjust it so that everything anyhow works. So that sounded like an incredible job for just a junior, and I tried. I mean, actually that's also an issue. Yeah. There are not that many game development studios in St. Petersburg. Well, in Russia in total too, but in St. Petersburg in particular, I don't think there were that many, maybe 10 dozen.
Mm,
And
yeah.
obviously everybody were close to my state back in the days, like a student who knows nothing but wants something. What will it be if you want to be a developer? Oh, games, right, there were those games.
Yeah.
Nobody would think that there is even a database. What's a database, right? Okay, in the university I already knew something, but just as a meta idea, software development equals software games development somewhat was very popular, at least for me and people whom I talked with. So my bubble was pretty full of those people.
Yeah.
And those guys I've been talking about, those software development guys, I didn't even know what they were dealing with before I thought about this software development. Well, anyway, I went by those guys, checked out what is actually to be a software developer. Well, anyway, no, I mean.
So did you just sort of like call them and went and saw what they did? Or?
Yeah, more or less. I just literally called a couple of those,
Yeah.
or wrote a text message, which I recall anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just said, could you show me your workplace? What do you do, and what's up? And yeah, they actually said, why not? We'll give you an hour a tour. And obviously they were, again, back in those days, some of those people were doing something pretty rare, so they were interested in the fresh blood. And obviously they were looking at me as a potential candidate too.
Oh yeah. I guess there weren't like too many software developers sort of going around those days either.
True that, yes. Plus requirements were still harsh, and you had to somehow get the people into there, and the only way apparently to them, well, this for many of those, would be to hire you as a trainee or somewhat that, and then raise you. And I mean, you're a sheep back in these days too. So yeah, something like that, and I looked at that, didn't really get excited what they were doing, so I didn't go with my known people to work with eventually.
Okay.
Good or not sure. But anyway,
what kind of stuff were they working with back in those days?
The first guy was building a satellite something. I'm just not entirely sure I can tell any details. So related to satellites,
okay.
It was a private company. That's why it's, I guess, was a bit relaxed on these things. But anyway, and the software was related to that. I couldn't grasp the whole picture back in the days. I didn't had any interest afterwards. But I would imagine that, with my current knowledge, I would say that something embedded real-time systems, pretty heavy written on C, and well, pretty cool. I'm thinking now, but back in those days, that was a little bit too intimidated, and the whole company was a bit more like an army. You come through a place where you have to leave your passport. People sign you in, give your piece of paper. The guy who came with you, he is your guide. He is responsible for you. You don't just go wandering off yourself.
Okay.
Etc. And I would be imagining myself coming there every time 8 hours sharp, and if not, I would most probably will suffer some consequences.
Yeah. So at least your friends didn't work in any of those sort of relaxed culture software development companies that, like, I guess those came a bit later.
Yes, definitely, yes. Yeah, and well, there were other guys who maybe were more relaxed. Well, the other one, for instance, they were dealing for medical systems, lots of custom solutions based on the inter-systems cache. I don't recall how to recall it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a pretty cool database, still popular in some limited circles, but that's relatively exotic, I would say. So it wasn't a pure software development as we know it is now. It was more like a plugin development with a meta language that somehow related to SQL. It's a query language mainly, but it's more capable than just a regular query language we're used to now, for instance. So pretty, I don't know, domain, very, very specific stuff, and it's very, how to call it, very narrow. So if you're a cool specialist, you maybe know all the people who can hire you, like in the world, most probably. And from that perspective, that came like a gamble to me, because while you're young, it's easy to learn, and if you start with that, it's like more or less one shot. It's either wasted years if you go away after that, or a very, very narrow perspective, because you don't have to see anything else if you invest yourself into there. So that was again my consideration, that it's of course cool, but it's like there was something fishy in that language. Like when you look at that, it's not Java, for instance. Even Bash looked very sane compared to those things. So I would just imagine myself like doing that for 40 years up until I get my retirement. So that, well, maybe not now, and also skip that one. And so after a lot of period of trial and errors, because who cared about a guy who knew nothing, just wanted something, I managed to get into some training positions into a company who, well, got me a place, Java, Python, Bash, something like that. So lots of unusual stuff, because again, it was applicable to real results. I guess that's one of those rare cases when I could actually see the whole chain of supplying from my workplace to end user sometimes. That was pretty unusual. You got lots of interesting feedback, and you could actually see that you changed something. And the company was a bit interesting.
And was this company in St. Petersburg as well?
Yeah, that's the first company I worked at, and that was in St. Petersburg. And, well, somewhat relatively close to the place I've been studying at. I mean, one of those closest places if you consider the travel over the water. But it's not like that. You have to take a bus. Usually they're on a train, so it was a bit longer, and it was frustratingly long compared to the water trail. But anyway, beggars can't be choosers. They got me in, and that was a great luck by those times for me. So I picked that and start traveling there. And yeah, it was an interesting company, Transys Software, and I think it was actually acquired by Wärtsilä company. So most probably some people somehow related now to Finland.
Yeah.
And it had contained lots of departments. It's huge, and it even somehow was split and merged a couple of times when I had been working there. And I guess by the Wärtsilä deal they managed to split it again. So it was lots of permutations. Yeah. But over like a general line was somewhere close to let me remember the right words. Close to hardware, I guess, and close to training devices. Like for instance, you can ride a truck somewhere from a simulation, or ride a submarine, or ride with a whole sea simulation. You want a stormy weather? There you go.
Okay.
Something like that. Well, again, not a submarine, but maybe a vessel, a tank, something like that. Yeah. So lots of hardware things, because you have to feel it, you have to get all these valves and gears, and lots of hardware tough solutions, because you have to display all this stuff, for instance, somehow react to that. Yeah,
you needed to simulate the sort of like the command center of the ship.
Right. True that. Yeah. And then there had been lots of software implications, and not even software, even products like charts, marine charts. Yeah. So everything related to marines, especially Russian marine business. Well, it didn't really matter, because if you provide the proper format charts, you can go and apply the whole system elsewhere. But the main specialization where everything had appeared was Russia, and so there had been lots of rivers, a couple of seas, huge interesting tasks in the north, because usually Mercartor doesn't work great on the poles.
Like what doesn't work?
There are different projections you could work with the charts. Charts itself, well, you can think of maybe a square piece of paper with some coordinates and some lines that show, for instance, streams or isles. But when you have to draw it somehow, and Earth is very irregular and drawn. Yeah. So whenever you put it on a piece of paper, that's called a projection. You put, I don't know, this to a piece of paper, you have to draw it somehow in 2D. Yeah, and exactly. The way you put it, that's
it will affect it directly. Yes.
Yeah. And in Earth, that's much worse, because you can rotate it, and that means a lot. And the most simple and usually commonly used everywhere projection is Mercartor. Most probably pronouncing it very, very wrong. But the whole idea is that there all the, and again, most probably I'm explaining it really bad, but all the, how do you call it? So there are coordinate network, if you know. Yeah. So there it's basically squared. So it's a right angle in between vertical lines and horizontal coordinate lines. And so whenever you if you determine where the true north is, you can instantly more or less know where you are. Then you just need a sun, for instance.
Yeah, so that's sort of one of the standards that they're using in
but there has to be a cost. And the cost is a whole model of that kind of maps everything to the pole. So in the pole, there is nothing. It's a how do you call it? Singularity. And because of that, for instance, you can also notice that there are like all these websites like True Sizes and etc., where they actually demonstrate, for instance, that the whole Russia fits into Africa pretty much. It's because you move them closer to north, the coordinates start to shift.
Exactly. It's that thing that there's sort of many websites about that. That sort of this country compared to that country. It's actually the size difference is really.
Yes. Yeah. So in the North Poles, you have to invent something else. And usually it's like, of course, a common sense that dominates there, but also a common sense of those people. So sometimes sitting in the office chair, it's mind-blowing how you can write these coordinates like there. It's crazy and really tough sometimes. And that was the interesting part. So you come there, and there are lots of systems, for instance, for displaying the charts.
Yeah.
And there are different formats. Of course, people had supported something, but you have to implement a rule or tool that you go, place on a chart, and drag somewhere, and it has to calculate it properly. Because projection is wrong, you have to calculate it properly on the. Sometimes it matters. I mean, with the distance, the error can be really big, and that required some math actually.
It sounds like you actually needed to do some pretty hard number crunching there.
Well, it's not hard. It's pretty common sense, but it was unusual because usually everything that was after somehow was, I guess, was not really like you maybe look at somewhere else, but it hadn't been anything compared with that at least. Yeah. So that was unusual and somehow interesting. You felt more like an engineer rather than a developer in a sense that you are seeing what you are dealing with, the implications of that, and you had to solve something where, well, you couldn't just get a Scrum Master to entertain you and then to split these tasks into sprints or whatnot.
Did you have like anything resembling a Scrum Master those days?
It was like, no, well, I guess there were companies who were doing something like that, but there I was alone. There was a very peculiar, I would say, guy with a very peculiar state of mind, flux of mind, who was responsible for some low-level end of the technology. And I was writing these UI parts, which included drawing some things on top of the charts that required math. So, in a sense, a relatively simple job. I had to really care about some buttons and selects, plus that math that made it interesting. But anyway, relatively isolated thing. And obviously lots of requirements came to me. And then I was alone there, except for that guy. I didn't know what to do usually. And lots of these tasks were just for me, like that ruler, for instance. Like, please do us something. You go ahead. Okay. And then you start to dig and realize that there are different charts and nothing. And that's why the old ruler that you copy-pasted from somewhere doesn't work.
So you sort of, like, no trainee program, no intern.
They just throw you in the water and then you float. It had ups and downs, obviously. Ups in a sense that, well, I had to learn the hard way, but I had to. And now when I retrospectively remember, that was a complete freedom. So I could do all this math. Obviously, they checked the result. But how it's achieved somehow didn't matter. And that was a downside too, because nobody reviewed them. So that was a horrible code I wrote sometimes. And I understand it now, but I don't think those guys remember me very good. I wouldn't. Well, I mean, it worked, but it was a bit interesting. So.
Yeah, I'm wondering, is this a kind of a, like, I'm wondering if I use this term correctly, but did you basically write some kind of legacy code there?
In a sense, legacy is a pretty funny thing that everybody can abuse. They can name legacy weird things.
Okay.
In a sense, that was a legacy when I came, I guess, in a modern sense of the word, because it was just a horrible mixture of technologies when I came there already. So pretty much applies to one of the legacy points. And I wouldn't say I had any competence or even any thoughts. I didn't even think that way back in the days
Yeah.
to improve the situation. I've done some minor refactorings, but I was still like pretty greenhorn back in the days. I couldn't even do proper things because I didn't know that there are proper things.
Yeah, I guess you sort of you were mostly considering like everyday survival, not the sort of long-term impact of the code you're writing there.
That's actually a very great comparison. I was just thinking of saying that it was an evolutional development. And all those refactors and the way the program, the code became better was because of these requirements. Like the guy comes and says, you know what, screw the UI that you got now because it's Java and applets, they will be declined in a couple of versions up front. Let's go mobile and please make us a website.
Okay.
Everything is simple, right? You've got the same code for drawing, go ahead. Why are you looking at me like that? And then I just realized that there are some parts that we can scratch, that we can do this and that, and in the end it became maybe worse but better. It leaned towards the modularity and stuff. Yet so still it was a horrible mixture.
And you started to get like mobile applications, sort of those
in a sense, there used to be, happened to be a canvas support in all major browsers, and well, I don't recall the exact details, and I don't think it matters anyhow nowadays. But the jQuery was still a thing, and lots of plugins for that. So you could create something very quickly, throwing things in, and no package managers back in the day, so you had to add it somewhere in your source tree and keep the libraries, the plugins there. But you could compile something out of that, and surprisingly, some of those technologies were really good. Well, back in the days. So yeah, I could create something, come up myself, not even knowing much about front-end development, and it even looked more or less normal. So yeah, we've done something back in the days.
Yeah.
But it was just a website that happened to work on mobiles, basically.
Nice. Okay. What happens after sort of you end up sort of leaving this company? What happened with that?
Yeah, I decided to develop more like to look for that knowledge actually, to look for supervisors, to look for somebody who can help me with development further.
So you kind of get tired with the way that you sort of needed to come up with everything yourself.
No, I don't think it's that. It's just that more like imposter syndrome that pushed me towards, in a sense. Whenever I understood that, well, it wasn't. I've seen other people. There were people who, for instance, created something for Google Maps. They were dealing with a software that, based on those charts, which were anyway a binary data, they could create a real live. They could create something like Google Maps, but based on these charts or things. I helped to build some infrastructure for those guys, but the utility who can actually read one byte and produce another byte, so it's a PNG map of some things. That was a sorcery, and those guys were like black magicians or something. They were astonishing, and I was looking at them from just down to up and just realized that I could never grasp anything here, being alone, doing a linear task UI related, and even if I do these things, I don't have a supervision. I don't know if I do that right or wrong. And whenever I go for the next time for working for a job, I could be obsolete just from the start because I was doing something.
So you kind of sense that you also need to like diversify your.
Well, it was just from the very beginning when I was looking at that cache systems from my friends, as I called him. I just pick a constant sane decision that I stick to something more modern, so I can get more breadth in the system, in this vault, I guess. And definitely I couldn't just unstick that decision, so I decided to just continue the work. And that included somebody has to be smarter than me and has to require something from me, or at least supervise somehow. Surveillance, yes. So I went. And to my surprise, I wasn't that bad as I thought. So somebody decided to pick me at this moment and continue investing into me, but at a higher level. So that's how I ended up with a more Java-oriented company who was doing, well, pretty standard by those days product for a Swiss railroad system, vending system. They contain tremendous amount of lots of business logic, as they say. So you had to. well, it's also an interesting thing I'll mention. But anyway, so a Java thing, and it was something like a service-oriented thing. Whenever you've got a few systems that communicated somehow with each other,
Yeah.
and in the end, they were producing some result. Either that's a transaction that gave a user a ticket, or that's some cleanup job that ran through a system, or something else. So lots of implications, and unusual thing was that it was an international company this way. So again, all these complicated things. Some company had bodies basically,
Yeah.
and sold these bodies elsewhere at a different price. They hire them to build a product, and the margin is theirs. So it's not a consulting; it's more like outsourcing, but a big one. So everything is handled by the company. You are a linear employee of that company, and the rest of that is more or less something you contact with when you fulfill their requirements, for instance. But that's it.
Yeah.
No business you deal with them at all. And again, experience lots of that. That's the only thing that mattered for me that day. So went there without no regrets. Had been doing that. That was also because international company had been promised by a tender. And the tender competence, well, things like IBM, for instance, that they will receive staff fully speaking with German, and because the analytics could write specifications and user stories and whatnot, and just give them in German to people who will understand that. Well, the reality came as a surprise. So, not that many German speakers were the development part of the team. Eventually, everybody who was involved into a testing part were there. Yeah. So the developers required some translations in the end, but because of the translations were operating a domain-specific things, like there used to be a term Leistung, and that was just for a ticket who was being bought and had to be moved through clunks. Well, anyway, lots of weird things, and they were all in the code, and you're pretty much, well, but just for fun, I went and asserted my German level, like an entry-level test they do for A level. Whenever you come and say, I want to learn German, they usually anyway assert you, just in case you know something. Yeah. And obviously, I didn't have any speaking skills. I didn't even know how to, pronounce a word, I guess, even though German is simple, really that simple to read. Yeah. But I could recognize the patterns of writing simply with that snake game. I had been copy-pasting and retyping the German ones into Google Translate so many times, they could at least sense that this sentence is not correct.
So because you needed to translate, were there like comments in the code?
That was like a specification, like 60 pages of German. And here is a user story in 10 pages that amends that 60 pages somehow. Yeah. With like diffs, minus that, plus that. Please arrange the context yourself and understand what does this change mean. Yeah. And the worst part, you have to think of that because sometimes these analytics were unaware of what the code requirements were and could ask us to implement something like nonsense, for instance. Yeah. And we had to fight back and explain them that, well, maybe this is not the way you could do that. Yeah. So it's not only a job that you need to, you have to think of it. And with German, it makes even worse because you have to really understand, so you have to suffer a bit. There were some attempts to translate that. People helped, obviously, to explain us what does the hell that mean. But in general, you're they couldn't spend the whole time on you, right? You're somehow doing that yourself in the end. Yeah. And so I got just basically that intuition, I'd say. Just if the word felt wrong, I just felt it out instantly. And it's not even conscious sometimes. And it went away pretty fast. I stopped doing that job. But at that time it was really funny. I was into that pretty good. I could somehow, I guess, navigate in German.
Yeah, you had developed a kind of intuition for German.
Exactly. Yeah. It was really funny. Yeah. So that's how it went, and it was really, really, really unusual because of all these mixtures. It's still a very good experience because it was a real hands-on thing, but it started to diverge in a sense that I didn't see any end results. Like, for instance, in previous company, even some guys who were using my UI, they can come and say, move that, or add us something else, add us a different ruler. Yeah. Here, nobody cared that much because it was a German sandwich. There have been so many layers of hierarchies that you don't even know who is the actual, who is ordering that. I mean, obviously that's like Switzerland itself.
Yeah.
But like because it's like their company, the company who is doing these railroad services, they ordered that, but no feedback because they just had their plan. They pushed it down as amendments to user stories. Oh, sorry, as user stories, as amendments to specifications. So it was a bit like a one-way directed thing.
Yeah. So you were actually pretty far away from like what you were actually building.
Extremely far away, considering that I didn't even speak German, which didn't help.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, obviously I had contacted with a few people just because they were writing these user stories, and most probably they were writing that wrong, and I couldn't do that. So we had to somehow negotiate, but that's like a very, very thin layer of connection.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is it. And after that, well, again, Java had been pretty much settling in my mindset for a while. I had power to do more with that and didn't see any reason to switch. So I went on, continued to grow, I guess, because I wanted to see more. And there had been Yandex Money. That's a company who is somehow maybe can be compared to Klarna. So it's a huge platform, first of all, whenever a merchant can kind of put his services through you. Like they provide some API that you can just say, okay, use them as a money deal, guys, and I'll send you the goods, something like that.
Yeah.
And lots of things around that. That infrastructure for the end users, they had their process and thing, like they had their own cards that you could use with this Yandex Money. It was anyway rubles, just because there is a law in Russia that restricts all the currencies to rubles when you deal the internal operations between like ordinary folks.
So Yandex Money, is that commonly used in Russia?
I'd say it's pretty widespread. Nowadays it had been a bit different. The whole story is pretty tough. So the whole thing had started as a startup that had been bought by Yandex. Yandex is a somewhat like a Google, just in local Russian marketplace. And then they played with that and realized that in order to develop, they had a plan, and that plan includes these money transfers and things like that. That requires some bank cooperation. Yeah. And banking corporations ended up with a cooperation with a Sberbank, which was a bank who decided to provide all these money questions settled for them at a price, obviously. And the price was like 50 plus 1 stock option. Yeah. So they are pretty much an owner, but Yandex has some very strict rules on a technological part. Like they could even veto all the decisions made by Sberbank. Yeah. So software is on Yandex, more or less. It had also been diverged through years and eventually been more or less separate world, but still the brand was Yandex. Yeah. And the whole like legislative power, I would even say, like the whole bureaucracy is held by Sberbank. But recently, very recently, I have no idea what happened, but apparently everything had changed, and Yandex decided that, okay, you take that away. And now Sberbank takes that away and somehow rebrands it, and maybe it's not even Yandex Money anymore in next year, you never know. Yeah. So it was a bit interesting. But back in the days, it was Yandex Money still when I came in, and somehow associated with Yandex, even though a bit different. Yeah. And again, supposed to have lots of interesting people, and that's true, and very big scale of tasks, because you were pretty much doing things throughout Russia. It may be, okay, anyway, Russia is so interestingly distributed that you are more talking about Moscow and St. Petersburg plus other cities. So, no, Russia maybe is a bit huge in a sense. Yeah. But yeah, so scale is big, and the tasks, because of that, become a bit more interesting than an ordinary. So somewhere you have to think about performance a lot, and if you do that stupidly, that must probably won't gonna work. And because of that, there are very high requirements to the way you deploy applications, the way you expose them, the way you do the development in itself. Even the whole structure of the team was kind of interesting. Actually, it's pretty much the same as in Klarna nowadays. I'm not sure. I think Yandex Money had appeared as a company more earlier. So, and most probably that's neither of them had invented the way. But somehow it's so familiar nowadays when I see that. So most probably that had been some company who had done that, maybe I don't know, Netflix, whatnot.
Yeah.
So interesting to see it, like very same, well, very familiar company. They just start describing them, for instance, and you already know what's good and what's bad there. It's interesting.
Huh.
So yeah, lots of unusual in a sense of requirements, tasks.
Yeah.
And because of that, quite interesting people too. It was rather big, like one of the biggest companies I worked in.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, you can say it's like the best experience in like requirement, like real life experience. Because eventually every company grows into something like that if they are successful. Well, I mean, the specifics is different, but maybe the loads, well, the requirements are in way this way.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of project, lots of experience, and
yeah. How long did you work for Yandex Money?
It's only 1 year actually.
Okay, well, it sounded like a pretty hectic year.
Actually, no. That German company was hectic a lot.
Uh-huh.
But that's because of some weird personalities I don't want to dive into. But there, it felt like a vacation, even though it was pretty stressful sometimes because of like my feelings. Nobody stressed me, on the contrary.
Okay.
But it felt like a vacation after that.
Okay. So it was actually, as a sort of company, and the culture was a bit more lax.
Oh yeah, that was actually a very good one. And there again, we kind of managed to somehow simulate that feedback loop again.
Yeah.
As if you remember the transits where the customers came back, there we had a very good monitoring systems. Well, since it's a product itself was a website hosted at our premises, we could monitor, for instance, do even A/B tests, like make one button red for half of the people and make the other one button blue for the other half, and see how many people clicks more. And when you see those charts, you can actually start to feel a soul again. Like you unroll the deployment and you see, for instance, that the memory drops down. It's a redeploy. Nobody uses the application. Then memory goes up and even higher. So it's your code. The new code starts to consume more memory and you see it instantly. And then the users storm in. And there is, for instance, some, I don't know, a sales period for a week, and you can see the heavy load. There's like people who are spending days and nights by shifts just by looking that nothing is broken. You can see that attitude, and you can see the feedback because users are working. You can see error rates. You can see a monitoring, like the guys in the monitoring systems looking at that and giving tasks for you because something is bad. And sometimes some very angry DBAs came and say, "Your performance sucks. Please learn how to write SQL."
Okay.
So very unusual, and that feedback loop was so tremendous. That was like literally you couldn't see those people, and that's actually a law. You were not allowed to see who those people are. Only some depersonalized IDs, for instance. But still, there are like you could see thousands, millions of alive people doing something.
Yeah. Like that sort of gives a good impression of the scale that you can, like, you were working with and really good amounts of that data.
And the stressful part was basically the other side of the coin when something goes bad, and you know, for instance, that this bad is related to a piece of paper which is considered an official document that gets to every person because he paid, and there is a mistake, like a wrong number on that. And you make a deployment which even fails the whole thing. Then you sit in and enjoy it, like minutes of silence before storm kicks in.
When did you move to Finland then?
Yeah, the exact date is 7th of January 2017. I remember that because it's actually my friend's birthday that day, and it's also a Russian holiday, like it's a Russian Christmas in that day. So yeah, it was a bit of an interesting date. I just drove there through darkness to nowhere, just to some odd stranger's flat with my wife. It was a bit depressing, I'd say. But after a while,
Where in Finland was this?
It's actually Turku. It was the same. I've been as a tourist pretty a lot in the north, a bit in Helsinki and Tampere, but never in Turku. And then, the only single time I've moved ever to Finland to live in. I moved in Turku straight there.
Okay, yeah.
And I lived close to the bus station basically.
Yeah.
So there were just before the bridge there are those big red buildings. They're relatively new.
Yeah.
So in one of those. That was the first flat. That was just a rental flat for a month. It was furnished. That was the only benefit of that flat. And so I could find something myself.
Yeah.
And after that it just started to roll, and I worked, and after
right. And actually, let's actually recap that. So you were contacted by a talent agent.
Oh yeah,
to offer you a job in Finland, or
back in Russia when I was at Yandex Money, the freelancer agent came in and provided this information about the job. That had to be just a pure technical framework development job abroad, and sound a pretty nice thing to try. I didn't even, I guess, thought much after I talked with my wife. She also, I guess, didn't care that much, because in the worst case we can just put our things, and after 8 hours we were home. So it was pretty fine for us for a try. And so the guy explained the job. I've passed a couple of interviews. The company liked me in the end, and I moved here. So that's how I started.
So you work directly at a company? Yeah,
at Vaadin, and
okay.
We were. Well, I was trying to build the next generation of the Vaadin framework there. Vaadin Flow, and then there was Vaadin Connect. I participated a bit. Well, anyway, kind of web-oriented for web applications frameworks. So it was pretty interesting again. I wouldn't imagine that a technical stuff would be sometimes. Well, it was also an open source project. So an unusual experience to deal with lots of feedback of the users who were creating issues. And pretty unusual. I'm pretty grateful. I think that's a big step into a big world of programming had happened there actually. Just because I realized that actually open source is a kind of good organization when you have to learn to something, when you just start in, for instance, as one of implications, and you can go and first of all look at what the proper senior guys do, and then try to help them somehow and even learn from that. And lots of development related to web was also a bit enlightening. So finally I found something more professional than machine jQuery plugins. And saw how the professionals do web, and that was also an experience. So and after it was May 2019, so almost 2.5 years, I've decided to do something maybe less involved to web framework development in general. And in the end just found Arado as a place who provided more like a platform for doing things. Whether there was a huge freedom that I could use to find a job that I liked myself. Which actually surprisingly eventually happened.
Did you meet with other people before that somehow?
I actually don't think so. Well, I mean, I'm still pretty bad with Finnish, so and I still have this stupid idea in my mind that I don't know anybody around, so I don't even look around. I just drive my bicycle somewhere in the wilderness and don't meet any people.
I guess sort of Finland is actually a pretty proper place to live that lifestyle.
Exactly, yes. So there had been all these weird connections, and they happen everywhere in small communities like software development that person at my previous work at Vaadin, she knew our other people, but not the other way around. No, I didn't know them myself. Well, I obviously met them before coming to my very first week, so we've discussed things a couple of times and talked through emails. But that's it.
Okay, so then you came to Arado, and sort of did you start? Had you already worked with Rust before that?
In a sense, yes. Well, not the professional work. By the moment I've been starting the work in this American company, I've already contributed to a Rust IDE, the one that's considered to be
how do you call it? Not officially supported, but something that,
Mm.
well, the way it all started first, well, okay, maybe we should better start from the very beginning and then I can go on and gradually introduce you to these ideas and concepts.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, the Rust knowledge came to me somewhere after I moved to Finland, just because I've been thinking after a while working with the framework stuff actually with Java that, well, there has to be some different ways to do things, and maybe that's a good time to try it out just because I've been working with technologies I work with nowadays for a while, and we got some level of frustration from web and the way it's done. It also a bit developed evolutionary, I think, sometimes. So I had to try something that was on the first place strict, but like the one who can use the tools that were requiring some, I don't know how to properly express it, I guess, for a non-developer. That's why it's confused. But anything, well, basically something that's not Java, something that's opposed to that, something that enforces a programmer to do things and bites his hands if he doesn't do that. Something like something that controls me in a sense, limits me. That was interesting because there's a various developments in software development, like the tools for them, and languages follow the same pattern. There are lots of them, these to pick from, and they're like dynamic languages, the one that, I don't know, doesn't care really if you pass a number or a string somewhere, and there's complete opposite of that. And web leans towards these dynamic things, at least used to lean up until recent years. And there had been a different world, the world where all these very serious guys work, and even functional programming, for instance, guys. That's a completely different world, so I had to take a step somewhere there. But on the other side, I wanted something more or less mainstream, so I could do some, well, the way I usually prefer to learn, or the way it works best for me, is something like with that snake. I had to practice with something, but still get a feedback. With a snake, the feedback was me, but when I grew from that age, it became a bit harder to find something for myself to keep me on going. So I had to at least find, well, it's also for myself, obviously, the things I find now, but it's a bit different. Like for now, I'm more driven by something that's useful for other people. So whenever the language is popular, you get more ways to express that popularity. The more widespread it is, the more needs actually people have. And then again, a lucky coincidence, a new language helps that a lot because lots of libraries are missing, lots of tools are raw, bad, etc. And newcomers are always pretty welcome, just because, well, it's the only way nowadays to grow, or fast way to grow. So it all just combined, and I just saw this language. I really stumbled onto that. Oh, I even remember the day. It was weird. We've got an American business trip. And there we've been pitching Vaadin from a booth. It was a Java 1 conference, I guess. And it was a pretty big release for us, so we were showing a pretty new thing, and people were watching it out and so far liked. And so there were sometimes different guys, just because it's a big conference and it's Oracle one, it's not like Java one even. So it's not only for developers, lots of DBAs, people who didn't know how to code. And well, sometimes basically at some point we could split people into these two categories. Somebody who codes, and the way we were pitching our framework, we were giving them a small task, literally tiny task. You had to add 3 lines to just see how the cool framework is, so that you can, by adding these lines, you can recreate the application that you can use to order your t-shirt. So, and t-shirts were really cool, like designers are also invited. So, and actually that was a bit tough because all the people just wanted a t-shirt, they didn't care. So you had to somehow pitch it, explain to them, and go through that, where's my t-shirt, and make them to at least leave some data. So and not to just say, no, you don't get a t-shirt because you're not interested. But anyway, after a while we split these people into these 2 categories and somehow alter your pitches, because obviously the developers are interested in one thing, they, like DBAs may be different. And it's just stupid to explain them why Java works this way. I thought there was a guy who came and just was really interested for some reason. I think he was just a recruiter, and that was his disguise, but I like the style at least. So he came, he knew what he's doing. He didn't know Java though. I think he came from C++, And he was just walking from booth to booth. I pretend that's how it happened because it's not like we were special. But anyway, he came to me and he was just going through the tasks. Kind of didn't know what to write, but he had some intuition. He was definitely a developer, and he was just starting to pitch his company all of a sudden.
Okay.
It was pretty gentle in a sense. I didn't even know the name. He just said what he's doing because I started to ask too. But he was like waiting for these questions. What are you doing, etc. And then he says, "Yeah, sure." And just you can see, you can hear a prepared speech, especially when the guy mumbles some Java code, and then he just,
Okay, so he entered the kind of pitch mode there all of a sudden.
Well, it's not. I have to give him a credit. It wasn't really like that visible. I realize it now, and only because more like that's the things he talked about were weird. But anyway, he ended up mentioning Rust. It's like, I don't even know Java, we code in Rust.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Okay, what are you doing here? Well, anyway, we talked a bit about a nice chat, but obviously it's not like I was thinking I'm putting valuable time in here.
Yeah.
But when he left, it somehow just happened to be in my head. Well, Rust, what's that? What's a stupid name? It's like, I know a game, Rust.
Yeah.
So, and back in the days, I think, well, no, Rust language was, I guess, maybe earlier, but because it's a pretty niche, especially compared to a game, it's way less known. And well, I always knew a game, and well, let's check it out. I thought, I just found out something that wasn't that ugly at all. It was interesting in a sense that it was open, just open, literally.
Yeah.
People came there, gave a proposals, and sometimes they even implemented that. So there was a lot of work with public interested guys. It was pretty young, and the way they positioned itself, like it's a systems language, meaning that it's a minimal runtime. You can do like crazy things on a compile time, make it very performant. You can write everything like operation systems with that because it's like C in a sense that it's pretty independent. You can use it. So lots of weird things on a sense that I only remember from a university. I was pretty much more into more like industrial development in a sense that I do Java, like this business logic. Here comes a person and tells me, with this tool, you can do like systems development and do that without fear to, break everything, because C and C++ are notorious for being a bit tough to work with, especially back in those days.
Yeah.
And in the university days, I mean. And there they say, well, you even have a package managers in a system language nowadays, and here is this. It's still the only language that has it and claims to be systems. Well, anyway, lots of modern things compared with lots of raw power and something quite interesting. And all these criteria, that's something that people need because the ecosystem was terrible. And this openness, so you can actually see and watch people do things before trying yourself. And after a while, when I looked at that, it became more simpler to grasp because they evolved it a bit. Yeah. It wasn't like officially released, maybe I think it was like a couple of months after I learned about it, it was officially released. So it's still really, really young compared to other languages. Yeah. So lots of interesting things, lots of ways to dig. And first I just looked at that, and somewhere closer to the end of it, I just decided to try it out and just liked it because it was just, I don't know, some magic literally. Especially on these handcrafted marketing examples you were getting dragged in. Like you are reading a documentation, and there is of course an example that shines. Yeah. You can just write it and everything seems like a pure magic and it works. That is amazing. Then of course you start to see queries, but that comes with an experience and you're hooked already, at least some people are, that you started and it works and you can see the raw power where you can read an assembly, you build something and you can actually watch the results, you can measure them, you can even have benchmarks, everything provided for you. You don't have to invent anything. And yet you've done something that can be used anywhere. You can write anything, like even this procedural generation can be done. Well, I mean, okay, they can be done with everything, but I mean, anything, literally anything, like this microphone hardware in a sense. Yeah. It was cool, like it was that long forgotten experimental plus feedback feeling that came back. Yeah. And I was really joyful for a lot of years. Maybe I should have switched Java for something. But I mean, even frontend didn't give me that fun, but that did. And I like that I didn't have to think a lot about bad things, but design things. Like I don't know, lots of examples in development that people, for instance, complain about nulls, that you have to check it for everywhere. In Rust, there are no nulls, for instance. There are some replacements for that, obviously, but it's all natural. And if you write something bad, the compiler says, like, no, please don't do that. It's bad. I won't accept your program. And that, in a sense, shifts your focus through that things, the tiny details that you have to know, have to always remember and keep in your head when you develop things, towards the whole logic. And there, for instance, business logic can be written better, just because you can refactor anything, break everything, then just press compile, and he says, you broke it in 50 places, please fix all them. And it's like, even before you run the program, you know that something is bad. And it helps not to think, and helps to think too about different things. So that's how I liked it, and during some period of time of getting proficiency, learned how to write something with that. And just came some moment when I realized that I have to get against this, like somebody has to mentor me somehow.
Yeah.
So I started looking for a project that is available, and again, just randomly stumbled onto something that wasn't even related to Rust, to code in Rust. It was IntelliJ IDEas plugin, which is written in Java and Kotlin.
Yeah.
Kotlin mainly for Rust. So I was writing Kotlin to write a plugin that parses, reads, analyzes Rust code and gives hints for that. So it was really, literally awesome. In a sense, I knew something, Java a lot. So the whole ecosystem wasn't strange for me. I could start contributing there like the same day I downloaded this code. On the other hand, it was something I'm interested in related to Rust, so I get some more experience how things are done in depth. And I spent some time, not big, but some time to playing with that, helped the guys even introduce some things, some functionality there.
Yeah.
Realized again how simple that is, how awesome is that. And I really found it again, like with this snake, something, again, that's very positive loop I could follow, because it was again me who gave requirements for myself. And when I worked as a programmer, I came to this IDE, like the editor I write code in, and I realized like, okay, maybe I'll jump a bit further and then talk about that. So after that IntelliJ idea and that loop I discovered, I found even a better loop in the other thing. So for Rust, as a languages, there are multiple attempts to build IDEs, and IntelliJ is somewhat standalone. It's built a commercial company on their platform with their tools, with their knowledge. So it's kind of like not that comes from a community, but the community helps them anyway. The community decided to go with one approach. It didn't really work well, and then another person from a community, the one that worked on that, it's very tight vault in Rust. The one that worked on that standalone JetBrains IDE, he left the company and said, I want to build it in Rust. I know how, everything is bad. I know a better design. And started building that, and apparently some company believed in him. He was doing it on his own. The company, consulting company from Germany, and hired him to sponsor the development. And after a pretty short while, I would say it's pretty fast it's pretty fast to develop thing. So after a while, the official Rust team had paid attention to that, and now it's actually like in a process that almost had finished of switching an old one to this new one developed by that guy. Well, okay, by that guy is an exaggeration. There are lots of people. But anyway, that's a new ID in Rust Analyzer, and I'm writing the words NL in my browser tab too much now. Because if I write Rust, there is lots of things, but if I write that, now there's Analyzer everywhere. So that was a very interesting thing, because it was doing the same task as that standalone Java thing, but everything is in Rust. You write the code in Rust for analyzing the code in Rust, and the way that you want to analyze it. So when I came there, for instance, that's about that loop. I realized that there are no type hints. So the Rust has a very strong, powerful type inference. So whenever you write some variable, declare some variable, it can have different types. And sometimes it's useful to just, when you review the code, see which types is there and there. And basic language itself doesn't provide anything. Yet IDE in general can know what type every expression returns, and so it can show them everywhere you want. And there are some ways to show it like pretty cool. and there was none. There was one in a standalone version, but there was none in that IDE. I was thinking, yeah, I can do that. So I started doing that, and well, obviously that was a bit of an exaggeration, but I ended up after some help from the reviewers. I mean, they didn't help the code, but they just reviewed that. I managed to do something that people start to get interested with, and that anyhow, that actually helped to boost the development a bit, because that hints that you could display, they can, for instance, display something like when IDE knows nothing, they can, for instance, underline it and say, I don't know the type, please fix that. And that helps to discover bugs a lot, because one thing is a developer who knows everything, but he stumbles over the bugs and, well, just don't do anything about them because he knows that it's maybe too far in the future or something.
Yeah.
And the other thing, when the community kicks in, they start to use it and they notice that, well, there's something bad. And usually they come in and create a ticket like, something is bad. And now it's officially settled, and the job is kind of done for that developer already. And the person wants that feature, and maybe the other one can even come, like me, and fix that. And there were such cases. So it kind of helps to gain the momentum. Lots of people become involved because the tool becomes more user-friendly.
Yeah.
And it turned out that there are so many hanging fruits or low-hanging fruits over there.
Yeah.
I just came in, I still know nothing about a proper, say, parser development. I haven't developed any compilers myself, but I could use the infrastructure that the guys have and make them better on a higher level. Say these hints or display, I don't know, that's another thing I've done, the auto-completion for some things. Or, well, I've done a lot. It just turned out to be so time-consuming and so fun that I ended up in somewhere like, well, at least some time ago, before I ceased the active development again, I've been like in top 10 of contributors, and a completely stranger guy whom I don't know him at all. I didn't even speak him in voice ever once. Just gave me some credentials, or how do you call it? Well, anyway, gave me some access rights. I can now maintain the project myself. Well, obviously, if I do some fishy things, that will be prosecuted.
Of course.
I have the power and the great responsibility. Just some complete stranger shared that to me.
Yeah.
Just because I implemented some top level stuff. I still think that's maybe a too good present for me. But I enjoy that responsibility just because I have it. It's like an achievement.
Yeah. How does it feel like to be sort of part of building that language, sort of like really from the starting point?
It's not like I build the language. I just build the tools for me.
Okay,
and honestly, I feel
help
miserable.
build the tools around.
I feel rather miserable because I'm stupid. You don't notice it that hard before you go into something that's very rapidly development. Or maybe I just picked the wrong domains before. And anyway, that's very rapid development thing, and it's a crazy entry level in a sense that it's very user friendly. You just pick a couple of custom comments, run them, and the whole project is run, tested, installed on your local machine. So you can start development if you know the ecosystem instantly. And that breeds lots of people from everywhere. You can see people, for instance, who build, web service, and they come with their feedback or come with their improvements. And that guy, he built that himself, like alone. And he knows like 10 times more than me, and he just shares his ideas how to do things. And you don't even have that level of context because you don't have, education, something. And there are lots of those guys who come in, suggest something, and you just scratch your head and see like, okay, I need to learn more. That's why it's usually like that. On the other hand, it's very uplifting when you get those features in and you get some highlight. For instance, on Reddit, there is a GIF that shows, come on, we get an auto-completion attributes now. And everybody's like, yeah, I've been waiting there. I always try and resist the urge and say something, yeah, I've done that, come on, give me some karma. No, but I mean, that's very, very cool. And that's kind of driving, I guess. Plus, actually, the convenience, because that, well, it's not usually true, of course, not always true, but that feeling that you can come and just adjust something the way you want, the way you like, that helps a lot. At least usually what helps, what's cool now is that there are lots of people who come after you. It's usually the way it comes is like people come, spend a couple of months. That was my case, half a year or something, just working there, and they just drop out because people find a better job, as had happened in my place. The one that I'm getting paid for. That's like a free thing, or because they don't have time, which is again my case. Thanks, kids. So lots of reasons. But the thing is that what's cool is that whenever the people come with the questions, you can answer them. And whenever you've built an infrastructure, like I've done, for instance, this inlay or these hints I've been talking about, there have been lots of things built by those guys, like for actually determining the types. But I've built the API that unites that and shows in the actual editor. And then come another people and implement things on top of you with a minimal thing, just asking you a couple of questions like, how do I do that? This, and that. And you give these answers and feel yourself like a person who knows something. And that's also cool because, well, I like mentoring people maybe this way. I don't have enough knowledge to mentor in this domain. But yeah, so this misery is kind of motivating. I think that's exactly what they say, get out of the comfort zone, what this means. Because when you're stuck at your other domain doing things for professional, you got plenty of money for that. Lots of people kind of see what you do in your company, for instance, and just do the same, or you somehow do things with them. It's not much of a development already. It's more like earning the money. You share your knowledge, for instance. Not much of a development of yourself, like your mindset, I've seen. But when you come there and feel that nobody is going to pay you anything like for your current knowledge, and these people will get paid, but they're not coming there because they have even more interesting jobs. It's kind of just showing that you're on the very beginning of the ladder and you need to learn and grind and do whatever else to get there. And that's motivating because, again, that's from there, I guess you can see what a true development is, like the people who are doing the more interesting projects. That's also interesting.
So I guess you sort of like the mountain, like
mountain view.
The mountain view of a lot of beneath yourself.
I think it's more or less again the same imposter syndrome plus the understanding that in modern software development, if you stop, you have to run somewhere to just stay on the place. So I'm not ready to let go. I want to learn yet.
But so you are actually using Rust in your project right now, right?
Right. Somewhere after a while of that Rust development, I've got something like some trump, at least in my CV, to show people like I've not only studied Rust, but I've got some commercial, so to say, commercial experience and even highlighted and got these rights, yada yada. So managed to pitch myself properly finally, and now it's a bit better situation. Back in the days when I was looking for a job, the majority of the Rust jobs were related to blockchains. That's a pretty specific field, and I personally am not ready to evaluate whether the next project is a scam or not. So
I guess you need to be wary of those in the field. Well,
and it takes some time, and you're again risk of spending your time for a lower price on some thing just to gain knowledge that you don't go there. Maybe 10 years ago that would be interesting, but there are simpler ways for me now. And so I just kept on looking and found out a company who actually does a pretty regular web development, yet based on Rust. They decided that it's good for them, and who am I to pitch them against? They are totally aware that it's not the best tool, but it works. It works cool, and part of that works processes against the enthusiasm, the sort of like responsibility for what we've picked up. Yet it's happening, and it's pretty interesting. It's somehow related to, reminds me about that German company I've been talking about, like the second of mine. I'm pretty much getting some knowledge from a start, yet with a huge perspective of web development I've been doing through my career. So I know now way more, and it's cool to apply some things for this immature ecosystem as Rust has for the web development. Well, you just can help it to some tools, like send them bug reports or even fixes. Or even think about finding another life and creating a few tools in your head. So, again, something interesting, and I wouldn't imagine that web development is such a pleasure after these years. It only takes just to change a step and stack and find yourself more difficulties with that.
Yeah. So what was the sort of why did they pick Rust then?
It's an interesting company in a sense that they are pretty long on the market, like 13 years already, I think. Yet up until recent 5 years or something, they weren't doing any active software development. They have had something, and the majority of the business were done through human contact, so to say. I'm not entirely sure how deep I want to go there, and I haven't prepared by reading the NDA, so I'll just explain it in general.
Let's dance around it, yeah.
Yeah, but no, I mean nothing bad. I just don't. I mean, I don't think anything happens if I say I just don't want to, because it wouldn't look that professional if I mess it up. Yeah, and so the idea that they came to mind is to automate that somehow and provide the tools and maybe even reduce the human interaction to consulting how to use that tool instead of doing the actual result by that tool. Well, I mean, if they have to use that tool and it works for some customers, why not? I mean, themselves, who cares? That also helps. But anyway, something to automate. They started building that with Python and something else, and what's important, they weren't a software company. So somebody like me on my very first job was been doing that system too. So lots of experiments, lots of deadlines, lots of requirements, no supervision, just do it yourself.
Yeah.
And it worked. It works. It's good. But some parts scream for refactoring, and there was a choice how to do that, and whether they keep the original stack and migrate somehow, or whether they do something else. And they come and understanding on how they want to deal with that product during that. So the guys who were in the software development, they at least understood how it more or less works, how the terms are held, how big is the layer they have to automate, and it just became on and on. I mean, it is somehow maybe a contrived model of the modern society whenever every business either grows or dies.
Yeah.
And the plans became more ambitious. There has to be more than one service now, etc. And it turned out that they have to be lots of requirements, lots of the application, the automation itself is not time critical or mission critical. Anything, there can be errors, but the way you have to interrupt between parts, the way they have to build everything, it has to be sturdy and maybe not that not that dependent on bad people. And it turned out that there are languages that are more vulnerable to bad developers than the others. All of them are. But it's just the matter of things when a compiler checks something for you and you, for instance, just eliminate some class of problems. It's not big, just the one thing that you have to main Rust. It's not like a blue pill from everything, but it just helps you with something, and it's more than, for instance, Python has to provide. At a price, obviously, there is some, but they turned out that there are more enthusiastic people who may agree on some conditions or maybe accept that weird position of doing a web development with Rust, and there can be results. And then they just concentrated on hiring stack of hierarchy that they lacked in this IT business, and I happen to be part of that stack at the beginning.
Yeah.
And now they're a bit halted so that they are evaluating the results and corona impact on everything, while still getting the contracts signed and having this automation propagated to more people who are interested in. And that's how it works. So if you take it from again, technical perspective, there's nothing huge. It's interesting because it's fresh start, so you can, for instance, influence on some things and you can avoid some pitfalls that you've already seen. Usually related to some maintenance development stuff. And then there is plenty of new to participate in, and that's the most interesting part. And the rest of it is just pretty regular service-oriented web development, just database, some business logic on top, and some endpoints to communicate with each other. That's it. So, I mean, it's not like rocket science or even a framework development. So, in that sense, it's pretty fun. That also helps because that's an unusual company in a sense that they're American located, and the time difference and everything makes a day a bit hectic. So whenever you know a domain very well, and whenever there are no surprises for you there, it just helps to even, I don't know, being half distracted on a kid, and you can still, even with some brain not used to develop something.
Yeah, that's definitely the sort of the other interesting thing in your project with Showseeker is that you're actually working for them to America, or they're like America based. So how did you then how have you enjoyed working sort of completely remotely?
I enjoy it a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. It's like dreams come true just as you usually stop wanting them.
Yeah.
So back in the days, and actually once in my very first company, I managed to damage my leg for almost a year.
Yeah.
I was immobilized.
Yeah.
I spent the whole year sitting in my flat working remotely, and I really enjoyed the working remote part.
Yeah.
So, and I kind of sort of dreamt about that after a while. Like, I will definitely do it in the future. I will definitely use it. But then I became a father, and it all changed. Now I enjoy offices so much.
You started seeing the benefits
Yes.
rather quickly.
But I mean, I can still work at home, but there it's harder to concentrate even on some sort of a level. I just hear from the background my kid screaming, and I have an urge to do an extra. I just
kind of want to go and check what's going on.
Exactly. even if I know that the mother takes care of, and maybe I somehow feel a bit bored that I'm just sitting into a laptop doing something, and mother takes the heat from a kid.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit odd. So in that sense, it's cool again, because now I come in the office usually late, so like a second shift or something.
Yeah.
And it's not that many people here around, and well, it's quiet and it's awesome. Well, it's not like there were many people before in the daytime in our office, but still. Yeah, and the remote work itself here is a bit different in the sense that I cannot guarantee that the whole day is not interrupted for myself, and we've explicitly agreed on that. So I have to time manage a lot, which I weren't used to before. It's still kind of I don't know, we can even fire up the Pomodoro, for instance, if you know the thing. So a time tracker that forces you to pause. Yeah. So you can fire that up, and with some additions, there are some variations of the tool that can, for instance, give you the whole the time frame, basically. Yeah. And you say, this is my working time frame, and you know that there it starts or it ends. Yeah. But here I have to track, like, I worked 4 hours in the morning, that I worked 4 hours in the day. Yeah. Yada yada. So it kind of different. So lots of management, and nobody will do that management for me. And time slips. You just notice it sometimes that you just go somewhere and you just lost half of your day, and there is like half of your working day that's planned still to be done. Yeah. That helps. What helps is that I'm an old, so going down to bed at 3 a.m. doesn't really matter for me that much.
Yeah. So you actually enjoy sort of working in the evening time.
Yeah. So, and when you walk or drive back home in the evening time, especially in summer, that's so amazing. Yeah. So
there is actually a certain, like, there's a nice atmosphere.
Exactly.
Atmosphere in the summer nights. Yeah.
Right. So currently I'm enjoying it. Not sure about the winter, but let's see. I used to be fine with the previous winter at least.
Yeah.
And yeah, work remote. What helps hugely is that those people are all remote. They have people all around the world, and well, not that.
So it's basically a remote first company.
Yes, and for an Americans, I think that's something outstanding. They used to be doing that from the very beginning, like 13 years ago.
Okay.
Some American companies say that they're fully remote.
Yeah.
That was an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And they still are. They are pretty much private, that there is a person who established all this here, still there on call. And well, that's a bit funny. They pretty much proclaim all these values that a regular Finnish company, modern Finnish company proclaims, like a family-oriented that has pretty much no hierarchy, big vacations, well, big by American standard, etc., etc. It's all there. Yeah. And it's really amazing to see some like common knowledge, common thoughts shared all across the ocean. I wouldn't say that it's a, well, at least my friends tell me about some different America when I ask them.
Yeah. But at least you, the, this company sort of shines positively.
Yeah, and because of that remote first, there are no issues. There are lots of processes that they've established already because of experience, so they know how to handle that.
Yeah.
They're still growing, so that might cause some challenge, but it will be later. We'll see.
Yeah. And have you ever met anyone sort of in real life from the
Nope.
company? Okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've seen them on videos and they saw
Yeah,
me,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's the only interaction we've got,
Yeah.
the closest.
Yeah. Interesting. So how do you manage the getting to know each other part? Do they sort of have these get-togethers virtually or?
Yeah, there are first of all they had to be a meeting, an annual meeting. They do that every year. They used to do that every year in beginning of July.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons that all had been cancelled.
Yeah.
So that was my chance to get to know everybody, and hopefully next year will be another.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's another one. That's one, and then there are obviously some short bios that they have on a conference page. So there are some departments, shifts, and people can click and see who is who.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it generally turns out that, and then there are calls, especially in these Corona times. They had to establish a morning coffee call, a Friday coffee, and that's actually funny when you see all those people who maybe sometimes twice your age, they are playing some games over video or even enjoying live music. There came a guy who just played some guitar.
Okay.
And they managed to find lots of topics, and well, because of the cultural references, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I skip a lot of them, definitely, but these jokes and stuff, they just start talking and it just goes. It's like, it's obviously this kind of a small talk, more like a I don't know, public mask, whatnot. But they managed to act pretty well under that mask, and it's very easy to get on board with them and just get to know the people, get to remember their faces, voices, etc. So that was pretty cool.
Oh.
And these meetings, they happened pretty frequently, so I actually got tired of them.
Okay.
I used to think before all these pandemic things that I'm not fond of lengthy meetings that require some sitting all together in one room.
Yeah.
And I'm still not actually, but I'm even less fond of lengthy Zoom, Skype, whatnot meetings nowadays, especially with the camera on. That's so horrible.
Yeah, I think most of us have actually grown a bit tired of them during the past few months.
Yes, and it's again all these dreams coming true when you stop wanting them. That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like they've given me all the chances, and I've used many of those. Just decided to skip on some. So I've got some understanding. I mean, maybe these meetings are very good in getting to know people. But they reach their cap pretty soon because it's like small talk. There's nothing interesting.
So I guess it's a sort of like you keep the system running, and then people can join whenever they feel like it. I guess that's it works the best.
Yes, and thanks to these systems running all over the world, I'm dropped out of all of them. So all of a sudden, and now I'm pretty much isolated, and which is great because this company has pretty well established Slack conversations everywhere. So whenever you want to deal business, it's very simple. You just go ping a couple of people, discuss that with text. It's somehow meeting. It's persisted somewhere the discussion, even if you've called to that. And it's very easy to remain on the business side. You just stick to that, and everybody's perfectly fine. Everybody's helpful. Everybody's helping you to debug something, or you're helping, and that just works. You don't need to do anything else. And when I realized that everybody's fine, even with me skipping everything, well, perfect. I've concentrated on that, and I haven't been happier ever since because, well, so yeah, it's very fine with that, and the atmosphere is very great. I also like it's not some kind of a sweatshop where everybody tries to track you remotely or something. Usually they just search the result, and I'm not sure if, well, that actually one of these things that matches with my friends' talks, that life somehow is spent on work a lot for those people.
Yeah.
But it's not. Well, maybe I'm seeing different companies. That's why. But for my friends, that happened a lot. That nobody works really hard. How to say it? It's a weird feeling. You have to catch it. It's more like a rhythm, a different rhythm. Like everybody's on a call every time. You can ping them in evening and they can answer, especially because of these messed up time zones.
Yeah.
Yet nobody is rushing. Nobody's even if they do something trivial, they can easily take a week to implement that just because why not?
Okay.
And they take time, yet still they're actively displaying themselves. And that's a bit interesting. Again, I'm not sure if that's every company. Maybe it's just very, very small representative companies that me and my bubble friends have
might be.
noticed.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a bit interesting.
And
that's making it a bit more easier because especially in some companies that's, if you put into a collective, especially that performs really well, you just keep up. That's something I'm used to usually, and here it's more like I'm too fast, I need to slow down because other people, for instance, if it goes through a couple of services, including front end, people will just make it. And I can obviously make other things, and I usually do too, but I don't know how to explain this feeling. If you can be lazy, and everybody's fine with that. Sometimes it's maybe fine.
Yeah.
I save some time for Rust Analyzer for that.
Yeah.
I improve that and become, or at least I can solve myself this way. I become more performant in the regular
Yeah. So the sort of the pace is generally pretty laid back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I've been pretty paranoid because of that, but according to the feedback, at least the one that I managed to pull out, they're pretty fine with my velocity and consider me some superhero that does a lot. There are a couple of those, and some of those are doing even more, but I'm not at least bad, so I have some laziness space.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah, so apparently it's a pretty norm, at least there.
Yeah. I want to ask you about, since you sort of mentioned that there is a certain sort of atmosphere in the company.
Right.
So if you compare that atmosphere to some other companies you worked with where you've gone to their offices daily, and there has been the sort of like the company culture and the atmosphere has been sort of really there. So does it feel somehow different at all? Do you still sort of, even though you have never met the people and the company is completely remote, do you still sort of get this sort of a certain company atmosphere when you're working for them?
Every company has an atmosphere. Obviously I'm getting some. Yeah, it's a bit fractioned maybe just because due to these roots of the companies, there are lots of people involved into a business stuff. Yeah. And that business stuff is a bit weird. It's like completely counterintuitive sometimes. So those people are somehow in their circles and I don't touch them, and there's one atmosphere. Obviously, I've seen them. Okay, how do I call it even? It's funny. It's something indistinctive. You cannot really describe it for any company, I think. It's funny there. It just gets into association, for instance, for this company. Yeah. I associate it somehow by the houses because, or garages or whatnot. So they're calling from the same place usually. And in companies, you talk with somebody, you see that background, it somehow changes things. Yeah. And you know that, for instance, today's a garage session because two technical guys will be sitting there with lots of tools behind them. And you just see it and know that, we'll be talking about, I'm imagining things, just for example, about like some cloud infrastructure maintenance. And it's always be like a garage sessions with them. So it's like, that kind of like atmosphere I get.
Okay, interesting,
Yeah, so somehow it's driven by personalities there, pretty much because they don't have any established premises for the company itself.
Yeah, but it might be interesting that even in the premises is probably driven by the personalities. You just don't kind of notice it because you associate it with the place.
Well, obviously personalities are everywhere, especially in remote first, because in the points of interaction, it's always like either friction or everything is good. Yeah. And either you are, oh no, this guy again, which actually luckily doesn't happen for me here, at least in that company. Or it's more like, okay, this guy, I'm talking with him about these topics, he's an expert in this, and then I'm so you always have some kind of expectations from a person, and that kind of shapes the conversation and the atmosphere a lot.
Yeah.
And then there is always Slack. Slack kind of shapes things nowadays too. Like for instance, this is a channel for weird pictures and news.
Yeah.
This is a channel for weird discussions. Like I mean, the business discussions that you don't understand ever. So you can always go and see whatever happening.
Yeah.
Well, it always have some kind of usually happens in the speech because people I don't know. There, maybe I noticed because I happen to know the language, but don't happen not to know a culture that much. So I understand pretty much everything they say, but I don't understand what exactly they're talking about sometimes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of ingrained.
Yeah, and it's even worse because after a language switch, I pretty much lost on my sense of humor, and something wicked that managed to grow on that soil of English language is pretty much devastated by their humor, because I'm sitting like an imbecile when they tell something and they're like, yes, and I'm like, what? I completely miss it. What? Well, I mean, it happens everywhere. It's just pretty visible there because of the language, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Interesting to hear.
And maybe that happens again because of the openness, and I think that's the case, because like, for instance, with Germans, it didn't happen ever with all this machine.
Yeah, you're basically just the cog in that huge hierarchy of German intelligence.
Right. And here is still kind of, because lots of high-level people are still pretty much horizontal, so you can hear lots of personal involvement into their business, and that's invaluable. So, but sometimes gets confusing.
Oh yeah, exactly. But yeah, thank you for this. I think we have reached a logical conclusion to this to this interview. If based on this, someone wants to contact you about Rust or hear more about that, what would you recommend for them?
To contact me, or just every minute.
Just throw you an email or something.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and sort of, and if they want to look into Rust themselves, where should they go?
Oh, there is an official Rust page with lots of getting started links, so they can start with that.
Great. So, but yeah, is there something you would like to add in the end here?
Just thank you. I guess that you are the one who made that so easy. So your spirit.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think this was a fascinating run through Russia to Finland, and then all the way remotely to America. So I think this had actually a really nice story arc to it.
Nice.
Well, yeah. Thanks.
That's where we're up to, right, for a good story.
Yeah, exactly.